Hey everybody, it's Trish Rulison with the Live with the Leaders podcast, and I'm very excited that we have a special guest today, Willie Miranda.
Hey everyone.
We are just finishing up our fourth module for our masterclass called Seller Prospecting. So we have discussed the importance of having listings, our 14-step listing process, pricing homes using comps and comparables, and then also using our ultimate listing presentation. So today we're just going to sort of do a wrap up, and I'm going to actually get to interview you, which is exciting for me.
It's great to be on the other side,
Yes.
Trish, and I was looking forward to this all week.
Yes.
But yeah, no, it's great. We did cover the seller prospecting module,
Yep.
and I think it's one of the most important modules that are out there, right? Getting listings are so important, and I know we cover a lot of good stuff on it, but I think today we talked about really just kind of coming up with how we evolved to getting to where we're at, right?
Yes. Yeah, and your experience and your background with being on listing appointments, maybe some of the hiccups you've experienced during the course when you were on listing appointments and working with sellers. So I'm just really excited. So, all right, so we'll get started here. Yesterday I ran your numbers for you, and you currently have 1,305 closed list sales since you began in 1998. And you started Miranda Real Estate Group in 2002, so that's quite a bit. You have a lot of listings.
Did your research?
I did. I tried. But that's just in our MLS. I know you have some listings that you've done in Florida.
Right.
You've been on listing appointments with other agents, helping them.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just what we have closed sales right now. So I'm assuming you've probably been on a couple thousand listing appointments, helping agents, your own, etc. So can you just give me a little bit of background on what you've learned from your experience being on all those listing appointments, and what's the importance of having a process?
Yeah, it's so important. I mean, having going on all these listing appointments, you learn what to do, but more importantly, what not to do, as we say. And you make a lot of mistakes, and that's why I see a lot of new agents coming in to this business now where they do make mistakes, right? They do have situations where they just don't have the experience of doing it. So I think, like you said, fast forward to now, there was definitely a lot of mistakes coming in, but it's always taking those mistakes and being better, right? We would call them listing autopsies, where we would just say, okay, if I lost a listing, what's the next step, or what can I have done different? What did we learn from that if we didn't get the listing? But just reading people too, and just reading people, how they react to certain things, the process of, from, what should I do first, second, third? But it really started with, not to get too deep in it, because I know we're going to cover that, but it really started by getting a good mentor and a good coach in the beginning, and really having the systems in place up front early on in my career versus having to try to figure it out.
So in one of our modules, we went over the importance of using comps to show value. So really going back onto the MLS, digging into the same properties that are the same kind quality of your property when you're going on a listing appointment, and really providing that value to the sellers on what you feel that range or that price should be. What mistakes have you ever made with pricing? Is there any story that you could share with us?
There's definitely a lot of mistakes. I mean, a lot of times you come in as an agent and you think because you have a real estate license, you're the expert, right?
Yeah.
But consumers look at you as, Trish, this is why we hired you, because, you're the professional, tell us what it's worth. And a lot of times we'll go in and I hear agents saying, it's not worth a penny over this, or it's not worth a penny over that. And there's no way to really determine what a home is. I mean, we know what it's worth to have a range,
right?
But we don't know the exact number, right? I mean, Zillow's off, I heard 87% of the time on their estimates, right? There's no way to really know the exact price, because the market dictates that, right? The market dictates what that home is going to sell for. And there's been plenty of times that I've gone in and I'm like, wow, this home won't get a penny over 400,000 and it sells for 450.
Right.
Or I'll have stuff that, Jesus, is definitely worth 400, and we don't get any showings on it, and the thing sells for 350. So it's all based on supply and demand, for one, which is a big key. And the other thing, it comes down to what the market is willing to pay at that time. So as far as mistakes go, I've overpriced homes, I've underpriced homes. I've had situations where I listened to a seller that because they said they needed a certain amount to pay their mortgage and pay their credit cards and their moving expenses to wherever they're relocating. And you kind of get wrapped up into that, because selling a home is a very emotional transaction.
Right.
And a lot of times they don't understand that buyers don't care what you owe on your credit card, or that you're going to pay $20,000 in moving costs. And sometimes we get wrapped up in that.
Right. That's awesome. Is there, so if you did make, you said you've overpriced homes, you've underpriced homes, so there have been some mistakes down the road. We're only human, we make mistakes. But how did you change that moving forward?
Well, the good thing is that, as far as overpriced and underpricing home, I feel we have a really good process now. And this is, I'm talking back when I first started. I would say the first 3 or 4 years in the business was really tough.
Right.
There was a lot of ups and downs in the marketplace. Supply and demand was totally different. We were in markets where homes were sitting on the market for 150, 160 days. It was a totally different market than what it is today. But I think what it really came down to is having a process, knowing how to look up comps, looking up, taking classes on appraisals. I'm not an appraiser, and I tell them that, but taking those classes were important for sure, because it would give me an idea of what certain things that appraisers look for, right? As far as, if it's a third car garage, how much more added value is that to a home? If there's a bedroom that's, say 3 bedroom versus a 4 bedroom, how important that is.
Right.
But all of those different things come into play, and as you do more, you get better at it. And then being able to also study the market was another big thing. Like I would, and this is something that I got from a mentor, where in the beginning, go out there and preview homes, right? And if you can't nowadays with all the, drone footage and all the, inside virtual tours that we have, actually go through and price it yourself. Go through and if you're a new an agent, go through a home and say, okay, let me take a look at it. Let me go through all the different comps. Let me compare it to all the other ones that are out there. Come up with a price, come up with a range, and then see what it closes at. And I started doing that. Actually, back then I had to go physically out to the homes,
Right.
but I would do previews, and then I would come up with a number. I said, all right, this is probably worth this or that. And I would know, and I knew very quickly, this is really overpriced, this is underpriced, because I worked with so many buyers at the time.
Right.
As a new agent, you tend to work with more buyers than sellers. So it helped me on the buyer side to help do a great job for my buyer clients, but it also helped me better on listing homes and pricing them because of that research and that I guess the education I got on appraisals.
Yeah, and just coming into the business for myself almost 9 years ago, you were the one who taught me how to, run pricing and comps and looking at the homes that are active, pending, sold. But there's even a process to that, that we follow. So I think just the key, having that process and then learning from those mistakes and moving forward.
Yep.
I guess, so we've talked about this before. We've talked about that you don't win every single listing appointment.
Right.
Sometimes the seller has a brother, cousin, friend, whoever who sells real estate that they have a relationship with. But when I've been out with you on listing appointments and when you've done them yourselves, you have a very high conversion rate.
Right.
I guess my question is when you don't get the listing, how do you pick yourself back up and get back out there? There's some agents who would be like, maybe real estate isn't for me, I should get out of the business, I just lost a listing. But you have such a great mindset. You learn from what happened, the experience, and then you're back out there again.
I call it the 24-hour rule, right? I always say that.
You do.
We can moan about it, we can be upset about it for 24 hours, right? We're all human, we're all sensitive, right? We don't like rejection. But 24 hours, that's it, right? When an agent comes to me like 2 weeks later, I can't believe I didn't get that listing, I'm like, I don't even know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
Like, we're done with that conversation. And why I say that is because it's all mindset. And you're not going to get every listing, and they're going to know a cousin or a friend. Sometimes they're just bringing you in knowing they're going to go with someone else, but they're bringing you in because of your expertise and because you're known in the area, just to see what you would say, and they want to take all your information. They want to know what you think on pricing. What are you going to do to market the property? And then they go with someone else. So that doesn't happen a lot in this business, but every once in a while you're going to have that. But if you lose to, because they had a family member in the business, or because, any scenario like that where they just already know they're going to go with someone else, you're never going to get that listing.
Right.
But sometimes you'll have someone that dominates a certain area, right? Like I just mentioned, I had an agent that lost a listing today to another agent. They said they went with someone else because they had more experience, they had more sales in that one area. And sometimes seller thinks that makes a big difference.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's not, right? It's the market, it's the marketing that goes behind it. But you just, you're not going to win those. And I told the agent, I said, hey, eventually that's going to be you one day, where they're going to pick you because of your experience, because of your sales record, and you're going to dominate that area. So I guess, to answer your question, how do you pick yourself back up? You just have to know it's part of the business, right? And this is why we get paid the big bucks. And if you're not strong enough to handle that rejection,
Right.
you're going to be out of the business and be a stat. Just like, what did they say? 87% of agents fail in the business
Yep.
Over a course of 3 or 4 years, I think, or over 5 years.
Yeah, within 5 years, I think.
And it's because they can't make a living because they get too much in their mind that the rejection, they just can't handle it.
Do you recommend, if you don't get a listing, do you recommend calling the seller and asking them why?
Yeah, absolutely. We call that a listing autopsy, right? And basically what you're doing is you're following back up with them. And there's nothing wrong with, if you don't get the listing or they call you and say, hey, sorry, you didn't get the listing, I always say to them, obviously I'm disappointed, would have loved to have done business with you, but can I ask you, in an effort to better my future presentations, is there anything I could have done different to win your business?
Right.
And you'd be surprised at what they say. Now, some are honest with you, and there are some like, no, you were the greatest. It's just, I did a coin toss, or, I, prayed on it or whatever. I had all kinds of different scenarios that came up. But my point is that a lot of times you're not gonna get everyone. So you just have to move on and hope that, the next one is gonna be better. And usually it is.
Right. Yes. Yep. So there's a lot of agents we've talked to before, and you ask them what they do on their listing presentation or what do you do on a listing appointment, and some of them say I just wing it, which is a little scary, definitely, especially since we have the 14-step listing process here. And I know that this is a proven process. I've been on a lot of appointments with you. Not only do you follow the 14-step listing process, but you also always do a listing presentation. How did you develop this process?
It goes back to your last question and what I said about the autopsy, right? Every listing you're going to learn what they liked, didn't like. Sometimes people said, I didn't like the price that you said. Yeah. The other person came in and gave me a higher price. So, they bought the listing. So now I have to educate my seller on the next appointment that, here's a situation that I told them this, the other agent told them this, they went with that agent, but then that agent ended up buying the listing and it ended up selling for this, right? Less than what I even told you. And a lot of that comes from just always looking to be better. Even today, we were always looking to tweak, things change, technology changes. So going through that 14-step listing process, the way that came up was the mistakes that I made, from, making sure you're on time. There were a lot of listings that I got and the sellers were upset and they're like, oh, geez, at least you showed up on time. The last 2 people got here late. Well, note to self, not to do that, right? We got the business and the other people didn't. Sending a personal note, that's as small a little item that is. You've even witnessed it. Where people are like, I really liked your personal, that was a personal touch. I felt more connected with you. Why? Because selling a home is a very emotional transaction to a seller. And listen, a lot of times they live there 30, 40 years. They raise their family in this home. Very emotional.
Right.
You show up there 10, 15 minutes late, they're already ticked off at you, right? But you build a rapport with them. You do a great job with them on a listing appointment. Send them a personal note. Geez, you had a beautiful home, etc. We're going to sell it for you. All of those little things that we do in that 14-step listing process, and even before going on a listing and after, make a big difference. So it's just, again, just going out there over and over and over again and just tweaking it. Not doing the pricing first. Sometimes you walk into a home and you do a tour with them and then you sit down at the table like, all right, what do you think? What do you think the price is? Well, I made the mistake one time of pulling out the paperwork. Oh, let me show you here. Here's what all the other comps look like. And it wasn't a number that they liked. So now I'm like, okay, well, let me switch and show you what we do marketing-wise. And they wanted nothing to do with it. Like, they weren't listening. And you could just tell, right, the body language. So these are all things why we have a process. It's like a combination to a lock. If you don't have the right combination or you go this way or that way and don't have the right sequence, the lock's not going to open, right? Same thing with a listing. You're not going to get a listing if you don't follow the process.
Right. So how important is it to practice this process and master it? I know you always say you don't want to go practicing a listing presentation on a listing appointment.
Right. One of my mentors always said, like, on a listing appointment, like, there's a reason why sports teams have practice, right? There's a reason why sports teams have coaches, right? They go out there, they want to master their craft, they want to practice, because when it comes game time, you want to be able to win. And if you want to win listings, you got to be ready to go.
Right.
Last thing you want to do is be fumbling through your slides, not knowing what the next slide is going to be, not knowing the actual process. And I think a lot of agents, unfortunately, wing it, right? And they just kind of wing it, thinking that they're just going to get them based on their good looks and their charm. And I hate to say it, but a lot of times they're not going to do that. So it's very important to make sure that they're doing that listing presentation and they have that process down, because if not, they're going to end up, not getting the business. So practice makes perfect, and I really do believe that on listings.
Yeah. Yep. And I know you brought up earlier before about the DISC personality. We train a lot on that here at Miranda. And it plays such an important role on listing appointments. I've been with you on the listing appointment where you've read the buyer, or not the buyer, the sellers, and you've read both of their personalities, and then you mirror your personality to match theirs. How has that helped you obtain the listing?
I'm just thinking, sometimes I remember being on some appointments with you, and I'll be like, oh, he's a D personality, or he's a C personality, right? Like, get ready. Right, so, DISC personality is so important, because you have to match your personalities, right? If I'm a high D personality, and I'm coming in and I'm just driving it, and I'm just like, come on, let's just sign here and, just let's do this.
Right.
And that person's more of a high C personality. Which is more compliant, right? Wants to know all the details, wants to read every page, and I'm just kind of shuffling it through. They're going to feel very uncomfortable. Right. And again, people do business, I always say this, with people they know, like, and trust. And the way you build that trust factor is by, like for a C personality, would be to give them all the information. Right. Take your time with them, etc. With a D personality, they don't want to hear any of that. They just want to know, what's the price, what are you going to charge me, and I got to be out of here in 10 minutes, right? So you have to adjust. And if I'm going to sit there and spend an hour with someone who's just pulling their hair out because they're a D personality, we're not going to hit it off. Especially if they're interviewing other people that match more of their personality. They're going to tend to go with that know, like, and trust factor. Right. So DISC personality is very important. If you can read them on the phone sometimes, just with some of the qualifying questions that we ask before we go on an appointment, that's made a big difference as well. So you know what you're going into, and you can go as fast or as slow as you want in those listing presentations. But this is why the question also is important. The question after the tour in that 14-step listing process. So, what are the top 2 or 3 things? I know that you're looking at, you're interviewing other real estate agents, or you've been on the market. What are the top 2 or 3 things that you're looking for in an agent? And then you just keep your mouth shut and just listen to what they say. And then in your mind, you have to go through, okay, this is important to them, that's important to them, this is important to them. And all the answers are in your listing presentation. So you're going to spend more time on those sections than you would, on others that might not be as important to them.
That's great. All right, so I just wanted to touch on this as well. So with all of the upcoming changes in our industry with the NAR settlement, agents are going to have to focus on spending a lot more time showing their value on listing appointments. Can you maybe elaborate a little bit more on this?
I think it really doesn't even change with the NAR settlement. I think you had to show your value before, and you're going to have to show it even more after. But I really think it's about the same. And the reason why I say that is because that's the difference between someone getting an appointment and winning a listing versus not, is what we offer them, right? Right. But it really comes down to, on a seller side, especially with the settlement, our approach is that when we're talking to, because we've had sellers say this already, right? Like, hey, I heard that we're going to make all this extra money because we don't have to pay a buyer agent. Right. And, our stance on it is like, well, you never had to do it before. Right. Nothing's really changed, right? It's just the way it was. It wasn't as transparent. Right. And I think in New York State, especially here in the Capital District, we've done a very good job because our contract spells it out. Right. So I feel we were pretty transparent, and we would always explain it. But overall, again, I'm not going to comment too much on the case itself. It is what it is, right? So I think it's going to be a lot better. So we can sit with that seller and say nothing's really changed, other than the compensation can't be put into the MLS anymore to pay a buyer agent. But at the end of the day, it really comes down to, wouldn't you agree, Mr. Seller, Mrs. Seller, is what you net in your pocket. Yes. Right? And 100% of the time, we're like, absolutely. So let's just focus on that. Let's just focus on what you're going to net at the end of the listing. And when it closes and that net sheet comes out, that's the only thing that's most important. So I always recommend our sellers to actually pay some type of a concession out. And it really comes down to that. Let them come to us with what they want. And sometimes you'll have agents come, again, I'm not going to say percentages, but they might throw in a tractor, they might throw in a lawnmower or furniture, whatever. Let them throw whatever they want. I tell the seller, and then we can entertain that. So when an agent calls us and say, "Hey, are you giving some type of compensation?" absolutely, we're willing to do it. We're willing to entertain any offers. Send it over to us. We'll take a look at it.
Yep.
And then it just comes down to supply and demand. It comes down to what the seller wants in net at the end, and that's it. But I think there's too much hype out there because of the change right now. This is all different, and unfortunately, the media hasn't really put it out there correctly to a lot of these people, and that's why sellers are kind of confused right now, and buyers a little confused right now as to what's going on. But I think it's going to be fine, and I think that going back to your question, like doing a seller presentation, a buyer presentation, buyers and buyer agents right now have to do the same thing when selling their listing, right? And making sure they show their value. They're going to have to do it on the buyer side too.
Yeah.
And I think that's the piece that a lot of agents, it separates the professional agents from the amateur agents, because you're going to see a lot of agents leave the industry because they just don't know how to do that.
Right.
And until they do that, we have a process, and we do have we've been teaching and coaching on buyer presentation, seller presentation for years. So it's not a big impact for us, but it is going to have a big impact on agents that don't know how to do that.
Yep. Great. All right. So just going back to the 14-step listing process, you make a point in there to make a mental note of negative selling points. So when you're touring the home, not telling the sellers right up front, like, oh, you should paint this, or it smells like cat, or some of the other negative selling points. You say make a mental note of them, but how do you address this with the sellers after?
Yeah, I mean, that's, again, trial and error, right? That's going on listing appointments and knowing these type of things. I've gone on selling appointments where sellers have said, I didn't like, we're interviewing 3 people, and I can tell you the first one we're not going with. And I always ask, can I ask you why? Why you're not going? Well, she came in here and she told me I had to do all these changes to my house, and I had to paint and rip out the carpet and do all this stuff. I'm not doing all that stuff. So basically what's happening is that you're insulting that seller, right? And you just met the person, right? First 5-10 minutes into the appointment, you're already ripping their house apart. They're not going to like that, right? And I always give the example, like, open up their back door and be like, oh, geez, you got the school behind you? This house is never going to sell. This is going to be a tough sale. Like, you can't say that to the seller. So what I always tell our agents is that when you're going on that appointment, you go through the steps. You're getting your computer set up or whatever, and okay, let's go on a quick tour. And when you're going on that quick tour, make sure you have that notepad and write down exactly what's going on. But make a note on the bottom, scribble it, or make a mental note. Here are the things that I want to come back to, because it's going to take you time to warm up with that person and build that rapport with them. And once you have that know, like, and trust with them, then you can say, okay, here are some of my recommendations. And I always say it's, I walk through your house, allow me to walk through your house with the eyes of the buyer. I've been on thousands of showings, and as I come through this house, I'm going to be looking for things that buyers are, that you may not, because you live here. And that usually gives me permission from them to start writing some things down. And then they'll circle back with them, not when we're going through, but when we sit down and going through the listing presentation on pricing, that's usually where it comes up. Because I let them know, hey, if you want to get top dollar for this home, it's got to be in top shape. Here are a couple of recommendations that I would make. Right. And then we go from there.
But that's after you built the rapport with them.
Correct.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. And I know a lot of times too, on like when we're doing those tours, you're always giving them like little updates that they can do. You never tell them like to, go and finish your basement.
Right.
It's little things like, can you clean the light bulbs? Can you need some caulk here, or like paint would fix this. So it's like those little things that make a big difference though.
Yep.
Okay. So this is a question I was wondering too. So you go on the appointment, you do everything right. You do the 14-step listing process, you take them through the presentation, you're into the pricing, you've got the data and the comps, you give them a range, they don't agree with you. How do you handle? Yep. How do you handle that?
Well, listen, every seller thinks their home is worth more than it is, right?
Yes.
And the best way, again, trial and error over the years, is that if you're just showing up there with, an MLS sheet or a CMA sheet, black and white piece of paper, and you're just going through numbers, it's just numbers, right? Reality is when you show them the actual inside of those homes that you're comparing them to, that's where reality strikes. And that's why laptop, using a presentation, going in there, and if you don't have a laptop, you can always print color photos out, but actually going in there and saying, okay, let me show you the 3 or 4 comps that I came up with that best matches your home. And I explained to them that, here's what's going to happen in the process. We have a whole timeline in our presentation that shows, hey, here's a listing appointment, here's what happens when it goes to market, when we get a contract, attorney approval, inspections. But we walk them right through. But then at the end of all that, an appraiser is going to come out for the bank, unless it's a cash deal. But an appraiser is going to come out, and they're going to take the last 3 to 6 months, and they're going to look at the most like kind quality home around you. And from there, they're going to go and pick, okay, which one is superior, which one's not as superior, and that's how they're going to come up with the price of your home. So I went ahead and took the liberty of pulling that for you to give you an idea of what's the closest comps here in the area. But when I show them inside photos, and we're sitting there, and I'm going through, and I'm swiping through, and they're like, whew, look at that kitchen. What a beautiful kitchen, right? You've seen it yourself. That's really nice. I always wanted to do the kitchen, but we never got around to it. Yeah, that's okay. I mean, the new kitchen's probably about $50,000, $75,000. I write that down, right? We go through the next one, So by the time we get to going through all three of them, it makes it a little bit easier for me to say, okay, I just showed you homes here listed between $400,000 and $500,000 of comparable comps in the area. Based on that information, Mr. Seller, where do you think your home should be priced? And I put it back on them. I never give price first because I used to get in trouble when I gave price first, right? And if they didn't like the price I told them, which they usually don't, then they pretty much don't listen to anything else that you're saying from that point on. So I always ask them for the price first. Now, sometimes you'll get a wise person that'll say, well, why did I have you come over? You're the professional, you tell me. I just go right back to the comps. And I let them know, listen, your home is only worth what a buyer's willing to pay. And here's what the comparables are telling us, or what the market is saying. And really it just comes down to, taking a look at some of these, some of these different comps, and then looking at what the amenities are. And let's take a look at, what these would look for in here. Like if you had to put a new kitchen, if you had to do new bathrooms, you had to do these things, we have to take those off like an appraiser would. Here's what the range would be. So it's never, I don't want them to shoot the messenger. I'm just giving them information. But I just let them know, like, hey, this is what the market is telling you. We're on the same team. My job is get you top dollar, sell your home fast, top dollar, and with the least amount of hassles. But pricing is going to be very important.
So what happens if you price a home, say it's overpriced because the seller wants to start high? How do you ask them or try to get a price reduction or a price adjustment?
Well, we talk about that because I don't want to lose a listing to an agent that comes in and just buys a listing, right? And we see a lot of that out there where if I say, hey, I think our range is, $350 to $375, but then they get the next agent and comes in and says, you can definitely get $425. Well, right away, some sellers would go to that. So I try to address that up front with them and let them know, hey, here's what the range is showing you. I try to get it within a $25,000 to $50,000 range. We could start at the high end, we could sell at the middle, start in the middle. But here's the range of what it's telling us. And then from there, it's really up to them to pick. But if they're just adamant that they want a higher price, and they want to go, say, over $400,000 in this, I'll just ask them, based on that, where do you get that number from? Based on all the information I gave you, what would you buy the home for, right? You've heard me say that. And they're like, well, I wouldn't pay $400,000. So then why would someone else pay $400,000, right? So you got to point out sometimes the obvious with them. But if we're like, not a lot of comps, which we found sometimes. The market is kind of shifting. I'll actually go and say, hey, why don't we do an appraisal? Let's get an appraiser to come in for a third-party opinion. And that's helped us sometimes get the right pricing if we're way off. But usually, if it's within the range and they want to go to the high end of the range, I'll say, let's start here. But we can always come down. And we have a system that we have, graduated pricing strategy that we have where every 14 to 21 days, we can actually reduce that price, and we get that agreement up front. And we have a form that we have them fill out, and that usually works pretty good. But we usually don't have a bigger problem. Once you go through those comps, and once you go through the photos, and go through everything, most sellers are pretty reasonable. It's just every once in a while you get someone that just has a number in their mind, and they're not going a penny below that. And those are the ones that usually end up selling for less. And we have examples of that we show them as well.
So the importance would be to set those expectations up front versus listing the property for overpriced amount and then going to them and kind of catching them off guard and saying, like, we need a price adjustment. Okay. Perfect. All right. So if you had to start all over again in this industry, brand new agent, what's one thing you would do differently when it comes to listings? That's tough.
Listings, yeah, I think with listings, I would definitely make sure I had a listing presentation up front, even if it's something, even if you never even went on a listing appointment.
Right.
Find someone that has. There's a lot of coaches out there. Obviously we share a lot of that information with a lot of our coaching members and some of the people that are in our private group. But I would definitely have a solid listing presentation, even if you don't have a team. Because some people say, well, that's great, Will, you have a team of agents and team of staff. But when I started, I remember my team was the front person at the front desk. She was on there. I had my lender on there. I had my attorney on there. I had my inspector on there. And we called it the dream team, right? None of them worked for me, but I had them on there because I wanted people to know that selling your home is a process. It's not an event. It's not something you just show up for.
Right.
So there's going to be different people along the way that are going to be very important. So I just walk them right through and I show them that here's what we need to do. Here's what we need to do to market your property. Here's what we need. Here's some background on me. And if you don't have a big track record as a newer agent, then what's the experience of your company? Right. And the company that I worked for at the time, I would use some of their stats and some of their numbers. And then from there, I go into pricing. This is how we're going to price your home, and here's some examples of different things that you don't want to do or want to avoid to get top dollar for your home.
Right. And now, even if you didn't have a presentation, you could use Google, you can use ChatGPT, all different types of resources we have now that somebody could just easily create a listing presentation and then sort of work it from there.
Yeah. And the other thing I would do too is I would work my database a lot harder.
Yeah.
I think in the beginning, like coming from the insurance industry, we worked on a database, right? That's our book of business, as they would say. And I think that helped me in the beginning too by working that. But I would work it even harder. Like, why not give every one of our customers a CMA or an RPR report showing what their home value is, right? Their financial person gives them information on their stocks and investments. Why is their real estate agent not giving them values of their home every year? And staying in front of them and getting those referrals.
Yeah.
And, we did a pretty good job with it. And we do, I would say over 90% of our business comes from repeat and referral business.
Yeah.
But I would have probably went even harder with that. And I think a lot of agents don't. A lot of agents wait. They don't know. I'm not really comfortable talking to my friends and family. I want to wait, and I think that's a huge mistake because now they're listing with other people and not you.
Right. Okay. All right. So if anyone has any questions on listings, listing presentations, appointments, anything like that, and would like to get a hold of you, how can they contact you?
Best way to call me, they can call me on my cell phone directly, 518-376-1073, or visit my website, williemiranda.com, and then
Start packing.
there you go.